Another group of scholastics were not Dominicans, but more heterodox, so to speak. They were the Jesuits, a thriving order founded by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who had had a vision, as you know. In Manresa, he had written the Spiritual Exercises. He was pursued by the Inquisition. He ended up at the University of Paris, where he met some youths led by St. Francis Xavier. Ignatius convinced them, and they all went to Montmartre and decided to form an order with a military, hierarchical structure and put themselves at the disposal of the Pope to be sent wherever he chose. They initially wanted to go to the Holy Land, but great conflicts made that impossible, and eventually they reached, or like St. Francis Xavier, were sent, thanks to the King of Portugal, to Asia, to Goa, etc. The most important theorists were Luis de Molina and Juan de Lugo, and in view of the de facto situation, and confused by the institution of the depositum confessatum, they ended up accepting as legitimate a demand-deposit contract, in which the quote-unquote depository appropriates a large portion of what he receives and lends it, a precarious loan. In other words, I give you a loan, but you, the borrower, take it on because you are in a precarious situation. And why are you always in a precarious situation, with a sword of Damocles hanging over you? Because at any moment, depositors could ask you for their money, and you would have to return it. Well, as we know, from a theoretical standpoint, that is an impossibility, and all these theorists require, rather in line with Tomás de Mercado's position, is that the banker avoid risky business deals and act prudently. Note what Luis de Molina writes. He says, "It is important to warn that bankers commit mortal sin." Wham! Mortal sin just like that. To hell for all eternity, if they use, in their own business dealings, so much of the money they hold on deposit that they are later unable, at the right time, to hand over the quantities the depositors request, or order to be paid against their deposited funds. In addition, they commit mortal sin if they become involved in business dealings entailing a risk of not being able to return deposits. For example, if they send so much merchandise overseas that, should the ship sink or be captured by pirates, they would not be able to repay deposits even after selling all of their assets. And they are not guilty of mortal sin only when the deal turns out poorly, but also when it turns out well. This is due to the chance they take of hurting depositors, and the guarantors they themselves supply for the deposits. The problem with the views of Luis de Molina and Juan de Lugo is that it makes no difference how prudently a banker acts, or how careful he is about his investments. For the moment he appropriates 1 unit of deposited money, he commits the crime of misappropriation. At that moment, he no longer has 100% of the tantundum. He can no longer guarantee the return of deposits at any time to his depositors. This is in addition to all of the effects of credit expansion, which we will be studying throughout the course, a poor allocation of resources, inevitable financial crises, and economic recession. Hats off to the Spanish scholastics, who, as you can see, grouped themselves into 2 schools. A laxer one, that of the Jesuits, who accepted bankers' illegitimate business dealings, and another, much stricter one, that of the Dominicans, which was rooted in general legal principles, as discovered by the Roman jurisconsults, and as we saw in Chapter 1.